Okay, I think we are live. Yes, we are. I've got the signals from behind the scenes. So thank you and welcome everybody, and congratulations on completing Tractate Pesachim. As you all know, this tractate covers all the preparations that one must make to properly observe Passover, from purging your leaven to selecting a lamb or goat, to bringing that animal to the temple to be slaughtered, and finally taking that animal back to your home or your encampment in Jerusalem, where you will eat it with your family. The ritual that we've been reading about takes maybe just a few days, but we spent 120 days studying it. So for those of you who began the Daf Yomi cycle with us from the beginning, we are now 4 tractates in, and we are just about 16% of the way through the Talmud. So mazel tov, everybody. My name is Rachel Scheinerman. I conceived and edited the Daily Dose of Talmud, and I am so delighted to welcome you to our Siyyum, our celebration of study. Somebody asked in the pre-questions what the word Siyyum means. Siyyum just means completion, and in this case, it is a celebration of completing a unit of study. I'm joined this morning by 3 of our wonderful and very talented contributors. So I would like to introduce them now, and then I will give you a sense of our program for this morning. So first, let me introduce Rabbanit Dasi Fruchter. Dasi, would you wave and make some noise so that the screen centers on you?
Mazel tov.
Thank you so much. Rabbanit Fruchter was ordained at Yeshivat Maharat, and she is the founder and director of the South Philadelphia Shtibel. I am also joined this morning by Rabbi Asher Lopatin. Rabbi Lopatin, would you?
Hello, Mazel tov. Good to
Wonderful.
see everyone.
Rabbi Lopatin is the spiritual leader of Kehilat Eitz Chaim in Detroit, Michigan, and is a past president of Yeshivat Chovevei Torah. And finally, I am joined this morning by Rabbi Avi Straussberg.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning.
Thank you. Rabbi Straussberg is the director of National Learning Initiatives at Hadar, and she has authored a haiku for every single page of the Talmud. Our contributors are going to each offer about 5 minutes of reflection on the tractate, and then we are going to open things up for discussion. Before we do that, however, I would like to do something we haven't done before, and that is I would like to ask you, our listeners, to contribute an answer to a question that I will ask. Okay, so here, everybody listen, here is my question. We read this tractate in the months leading up to Passover. And some of you asked, was that planned? The answer is no, that was just a happy accident. The Daf Yomi cycle has been going on repeat without a day's break for now 100 years, maybe even a bit more, maybe approximately 100 years. And so it just so happened that this time things lined up beautifully so that we would study Tractate Pesachim and finish it right before Passover. And so here's my question for all of you. How did your experience of studying this tractate change your thinking about Passover? How will you bring that into your Passover practice this year? We would love to know. We would love to share some of your answers. So please give that some thought. Pop it in the comments on YouTube or on Zoom, and some of my wonderful and invisible colleagues will gather those up together and we'll hopefully share some of them at the end. Okay? All right. Okay, so now we're going to turn, though, to our wonderful experts who are going to offer a few reflections from this tractate. So I'm going to start with you, Rabbi Straussberg. Go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm going to go ahead when I'm talking. I'm going to reference some sources. So I'm dropping the link. If you want to open it, you can see the sources that I'm referencing, but also you can just stay with me and hear it orally if that's your kind of thing. I really appreciated your question of how did the synchronous timing of finishing Pesachim, timing it with Pesach, how did that influence my learning? And I'll say that as we approach a second COVID Pesach, many of us didn't think we were going to be here again this year. We thought we were having one COVID Pesach. We were doing this smaller Pesach, this turning inward a Pesach that for many of us was just with ourselves or with our immediate families and our houses, a lot of us are now approaching a second COVID Pesach, again, a smaller Pesach. And as we move into that and prepare for that, I found myself really focusing on the strands in Pesachim, the role of community and the importance of community in making that sacrifice. So that's where I want to go. If you want to look at the source sheet, feel free to pull it open. And so we learn in Shemot, we learn in Exodus, Torah says, Dabru el kol adat Yisrael emor, be'asor lechodesh hazeh yichud lahem ish se leveit avot se lebayit. So speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. This idea of a Pesach that's really about the family making it at home. It's in each home. And that's, in a sense, the Pesach we had last year and the Pesach that many of us are having this year. It's actually the authentic Pesach. It's a Pesach that's a return to the Torah, a return to this individual offering, a family offering, doing it within the confines of our house, of our bayit. But then already in the next pasuk, the Torah expands and says, but what happens if you get a lamb that's just too big and I'm one person alone in my house and I can't eat it all up? Then the Torah says, in that case, you should invite your friend or your neighbor over to share in it. If the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with the neighbor who dwells nearby. In proportion to the number of persons, you shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat. The Hebrew there is tachosu al haseh. And Rashi says on that, what it means is each person should be numbered, should be accounted for on the lamb. So on one hand, the Pesach of the Torah, the Pesach we had last year and some of us this year, is very much this authentic, this returning to our household, a turning inward. But we already see the hint in the Torah of, well, what if it's too much for us? What if it's too much meat? Then we begin to expand out to our neighbors. You may have noticed that the Pesach of the Gemara already moves beyond the Pesach of the Torah, the Pesach that's located in the home, and becomes a much more communal Pesach, a Pesach that's about numbers and people being registered and showing up all for the sacrifice. So the Rambam says on that in Hilchot Korban Pesach, the Rambam says, Ein shochetin et ha-Pesach ele lemenuyan, that you can only slaughter the Pesach offering, the sacrifice, for those that are counted, who are registered for that offering. Shene'emar, how do we know this? Tachosu ala say, you should be numbered on the lamb. Milamed shemitmanim alav sheknu chai, that you have to be registered for this particular Pesach offering while it is still living. I want to say in the realm of registering for Zoom events, I was particularly struck by this language that came up over and over in the Tractate of, you have to register for an offering, right? Like before Pesach shows up, you can't wait till the last minute. You have to register. I have to know which lamb I'm on. I have to be counted. And then the Rambam says in this beautiful language, and the people that are registered, that are counted for that lamb, they are called the members of a chavarah, the members of a company. So we move from the Pesach of the Torah, that's about the individual, the family, the house, to I am registered with a group of people. I matter to them and they matter to me. And together as members of this b'nei chavarah, this chavarah, we are showing up together. The question is, what happens in times like ours where we don't have a chavarah? What happens in times when we are alone, when we can't gather with other people, the moment we're in now? Where does that leave us? So the Mishnah of Pesachim says very clearly, Ein shochatim et ha-Pesach ala yachid divrei Rabbi Yehuda. You can't slaughter, you can't sacrifice a Pesach offering for an individual. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So for us, for some of us, that would be a real problem. I mean, it's not a real problem because I don't know that any of us are sacrificing our own offerings at this moment, but really what he's teaching here, and this is something that we see in a lot of the Tractate, is that the Pesach offering moves from being a home affair to something that's supposed to be about being in community, being with other people, being seen, registered, counted with others. And so here we have Rabbi Yehuda saying very clearly that sacrifice is not something you can do alone. Thank God we have this other opinion, Rabbi Yossi Matir. Rabbi Yossi permits and says, actually, you can do it alone. And so what we see gets sort of sussed out to be the ideal position and the reality position. Of the ideal position is we want to do the Pesach in community. We want to be a part of a chavora, but there is the less than ideal position, the reality position, that if you find yourself as a yachid, you find yourself as an individual or just your family or household, Rabbi Yossi permits us to sacrifice on our own. What does the Gemara do with this? So now we're moving to, actually, I'm giving you Pesachim 95a. So the rabbis are debating. It says in the Torah, when talking about Pesachim, ya'asu oto, they should do it. They should sacrifice it in the plural. And so the Gemara answers, Rabbanan ha ya'asu oto mai avdele. This plural phrase of they should do it, what do the rabbis do with it? Mi ba'ele she'ein shochatim et hapesach al yachid. We need that plural of they should sacrifice it, they should do it, to teach that you don't slaughter the Pesach offering for an individual, right? This is the position that we heard of Rabbi Yehuda, and sort of the ideal position. Ideally, we want to do it in community. Dechama de'efshar le'adore madrinan. That as much as possible to go out and search and find more people, we want to go out and find more people. That the ideal is if you find yourself as a yachid, as an individual alone, the Gemara seems to be pushing us and saying, as much as possible, you want to find other people to be in community with on Pesach. And Rashi, he takes us a step further on that line. He says, Pesach sheni ala yachid shenitchelo lechahi katav ya'asu l'shon rabim. So he says, really, this verse, ya'asu oto, they should do it in the plural, is talking about Pesach sheni, or those who were unable to bring the first offering because they were not in a state of purity, or they were far away on a long journey and they're forced to push off to bring it on the second offering. We're concerned that when they're bringing it on Pesach Sheni, they're not going to be able to bring it in community, because what if everyone brought it on the first time and then they're all alone on the second time? And they say it's written they should do it, to emphasize we not only care about community on the first time, we're also really concerned about the people who got pushed off, that couldn't bring it with the rest of us on the second time. And so that's why dekama de'efshar la'adori acher tamei chaver lehimno to imo mandrinan, that as much as possible it is to search and find someone else who was also tamei, who was also impure and unable to bring it, so that that person can be counted with another person also on Pesach Sheni. And I want to just emphasize that the language here is on the community, mihadrinan. We as the community, we search and we find someone. So it's not only on the individual has to go and make sure they're not alone, but that actually as a community, we are taking up the obligation to make sure that people are not alone on Pesach, to make sure that the person who was out of community has people to celebrate with. What does that mean for this year? We're facing a weird sort of Pesach Sheni, in a sense, a second COVID Pesach, in that some of us, thank God, are vaccinated, and we'll be able to have a little bit of a larger Pesach than we have last year. And for those people, Mazel Tov, and I'm happy for those people. And some of us are not quite yet. Some of us are still in the Pesach of the Torah. We're still in this Pesach of being a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But I think what the Gemara is teaching us is that even though that's okay, Rabbi Yossi says it's okay, it's not ideal, but you can do it alone. We have the permission to do it alone. You shouldn't have to. And that as much as possible, we as a community have to take on the obligation to make sure people do not feel that they are alone. That does not mean that we should be running out and having Pesach together, God forbid. I'm not suggesting we risk ourselves, but the question is, how do we make sure that people feel like they are seen and counted in community, even while we are still at a distance? How do we make sure that we're asking, we know, what are you doing for Pesach, even if we're not able to spend Pesach with each other? And that's what the Gemara is teaching, is we can do it on alone. The Torah teaches us this is actually a return to the real Pesach of the Torah, but we shouldn't need to. So how do we show up for each other? How do we count as a chavurah, even when we're apart?
Thank you so much, Rabbi Straussberger. Hopefully, this activity also makes people feel a little bit more part of a community, because this is a wonderful learning community as well. I am going to pass the virtual microphone on now. Rabbi Lopatin, why don't you offer us some few words? And before you do, let me just tell all the people who just joined us, because a lot of them did, welcome to Siyyum Tractate Pesachim. We're celebrating the completion of this tractate. And this time we have reflections from our wonderful experts, but I also have a question for all of you. So if you just got here, please pop your answer to the following question into the comments so you can read each other's comments and we can share some at the very end. The question is, given that this tractate happened to line up beautifully in the Daf Yomi cycle to finish right before the holiday of Passover, that was a coincidence, it wasn't planned. Is there anything that you are doing or thinking differently about Passover this year? How is it changing your Passover experience this year? Okay, so I'm going to pass it on to you, Rabbi Lopatin, for some words of wisdom about this tractate.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's really wonderful to be learning with everyone. And of course, nothing can work out perfectly. So we're kind of, we finished a couple of days ago, but it's great to do the Siyyum on Ta'anit B'chorim, on what would have been the fast where the firstborn celebrate that you were saved from Egypt, from the plague of the firstborn. So whether, whatever your gender, firstborn, whether you're just the oldest in the family, whatever it is, congratulations to you. And sorry you weren't chosen to be the priest, but what can you do? But really, congratulations. And I'm the youngest. So, but I'm excited to be doing part of this Siyyum. So I just want to talk about 3 different quick points. One of them is a memory from when I was 10 years old. I guess it was either 4th grade or 5th grade in Israel. And it's the opening word of the Masechet, or Larbasar. If you go way back, you remember the whole debate. What does or mean? What is normally or means light? I mean, right? Does it mean the evening? Does it mean the day? What does it mean? And I remember arguing with my teacher. I think it was Rabbi or Mr. Wiener, Mora Wiener, I think. He said, well, Leil doesn't sound so nice. The normal word for nighttime, Leil, doesn't sound so nice. And I remember back and forth arguing with him and saying, no, Leil is lovely. It's a lovely word. So I was kicked out of class so that sort of maybe started my rebellious side as much as it is. But I think it's so great that terms like or, which light, even terms like Rishon, right? There's a debate in the Gemara. What is Rishon? Rishon normally means first. I think, does it mean the first? Does it mean the one before? These basic ideas and words can be debated, and that shows us everything in Judaism is on the table. Everything can be debated. When the word or, what does light mean? And in the end, it means night in the end. Everything, there are surprises and everything can be debated. The other just really wonderful halacha that I wanted to mention, it seems a little bit obscure. It's on Daf Kuf Amud Aleph on page 100a. It's about saying Kiddush on the night of Passover. Now, it's not exactly so relevant perhaps for this year, but it was relevant for Purim this year when Purim was on Friday and people were having their big, wonderful meals. And the question is when to have that meal, and went right into Shabbat. So the question was, maybe you should combine the Shabbat meal with the Purim meal and how to do it. And first of all, it starts out wonderful. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says the name of Shmuel. Ein halacha lo ka Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha is not like Rabbi Yossi. Feels a little bit like what's going on in Israel with the different political parties saying, I don't like this one, I don't like that one, I'm not comfortable. So he comes up with a third point, Ella Pores Mapa Umakadesh. But his answer is that you place a mapa, like a tablecloth, like a Shabbat challah cloth, over the bread, and you make Kiddush. So in other words, you're having your meal, and suddenly the holiday comes in. You can pause. You don't have to end your meal. You can just pause and put a cloth over it, say Kiddush, and then continue with your meal. And I think this is really one of the questions that was asked over to my Jewish learning over the last 120 days was, how do I combine being part of the secular world, and how do I create kedusha, holiness in that world? How do I have my Judaism go together with that? And the answer is not end your meal, end your secular meal. Yom Tov is coming in, the holiday or Shabbat's coming in. You got to end it and start something new. Sometimes it is that you can put a cloth over a little separation from the secular world, from the world of competition and everything, and say the Kiddush, have a little bit of holiness, and then go back. By the way, that is one reason given why we cover the challah. I know people, the reason covering up the challah on Shabbat is you don't want to embarrass the challah. That's kind of the lovely reason. But this is a more, Lithuanian halachic reason that we want to really cover up any kind of food, and certainly challah, when we're saying the Kiddush. So we do follow this every Friday night and every Yom Tov. And I hope in our own lives, it's an indication that we can have both. We can have our regular meal who we're with, and we can, as long as we remember that there will be times that we have to put a cloth over it and step out, whether it's maybe catching a quick afternoon prayer, a mincha, whether it's catching Shabbat, however we do that, there will be these moments that we place a little covering over the world, and then we can go back to the world. So as we head for this Passover, which with cleaning up in the kitchen and the chametz and everything, and the eating and the discussing, and this beautiful masechet that really combines kind of that sacrifice part and then this beautiful part of what's so meaningful for us, let's be comfortable with, first of all, asking the toughest questions about anything, and also being comfortable that we can live in this secular world and we can also have that holiness, and that the rabbis of Tractate Pesachim were very sensitive to that and agree that that is possible. So Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Rabbi Lopat. And we're going to take some reflections from Rabbanit Fruchter in a few minutes. But first, I'm going to read some of the answers that have come in from you. So if those of you who are just joining us might not know that at the top of this event, I posed a question to the room: how has the reading of this tractate changed your perspective on Passover this year? So I'm going to read a few of your answers now. So in no particular order. A few days ago, the daf spoke about clearing the table as the Seder began in order to cause the attendees to sit up and take notice and ask questions. I'm going to try it. Also, I love that asking unscripted questions has long been a part of us Seders, and I was really pleased to see a precedent for that. Let's see. Someone else told us that they are going to eat lamb this year. Someone else told us that they will approach the Seder with more kavanah, with more thoughtful intention this year. We heard from somebody that they will stop eating at noon, so they will be good and hungry for that matzah at Seder. And others of you told us you would focus more on engaging the children, seeing how important that is to the rabbis. So I will read some more of these, and let me see. There was one question in here that this is just a logistical question that I thought I could answer for everybody real quickly, because Rabbi Lopatin also touched on it. The answer to this question was about Ta'anit Bechorot, the fast of the firstborns. It's traditional for Jewish firstborn children to fast in commemoration of being saved from the plague of the death of the firstborn. And yes, we did intentionally schedule this Siyyum a few days after the close of the tractate. We felt it was close enough to be a Siyyum on the tractate, and also it could double as a way for those firstborns to essentially get out of their fast. A Siyyum will turn a fast day into a joyful day. This doesn't work for every fast. Please don't try it on Yom Kippur, but it does for some. And in this case, it does. So we scheduled this day so that born children who observe this ritual and want a Siyyum, so they don't have to fast for the rest of the day, can do that. Normally, this fast is on Erev Pesach, but because Erev Pesach this year is Shabbat, and yes, we've gotten to study a lot about that, haven't we, in this tractate? Because it falls on Shabbat and we don't do the fast on Shabbat or Erev Shabbat, it was moved back to Thursday. And that's why we're all here this morning. Okay, so I'm going to hand the microphone on to Rabbanit Fruchter for her reflections on the tractate, and I will come back and read more of your reflections in a little bit. So Rabbanit Fruchter, over to you.
Thank you so much. This is so beautiful, and just some gratitude to my Jewish learning for making this happen. This is amazing, amazing accomplishment and great energy for Torah learning this today. So the reflection that I want to offer is about blood. So I don't know if I'm curious if you were learning through the tractate, you got stuck on some of the bloody parts, or they were exciting you or engaging you. Show of hands, which some of you who did not love that part, the bloody part. Okay. And then maybe show of hands of who actually kind of enjoyed it. Yeah. 3 of you. All right. Well, I want to bring back something from Daf 57, when the temple actually cried out to expel Yisachar of Kfar Bar Kai. There's this Kohen who disgraced the priest who disgraced the work of the temple because he wore silk gloves. He covered his hands to avoid the blood when he was doing that special work. And I was stopped in my tracks when I read this, when I learned this part. Whereas the Gemara is screaming out to us, all right, everybody, this whole thing about the blood, all of this stuff about the temple and, the slaughtering and all of the noise and the lambs and the goats, all these things, get your hands dirty with the mitzvot. Get them dirty. If you're not getting your hands dirty, something is wrong. Something needs to be adjusted. And I love that it just continues, perek, chapter after chapter, with all of these laws. And this little interlude to remind us, lest you think this is a clean activity taking place only like we see in the 10th chapter with these beautiful dishes and the hallel, the singing of praise of God. No. It's about getting dirty. There's a little bit of that ethos in Masechet Pesachim and Tractate Pesachim. And to build and kind of sandwich or korech on what Rabbi Straussberg began with around the house, the ideas about the house. There's blood on our house too. If you think about this, the original Passover involves the blood on the lintel and the doorposts. And one of my favorite passages from Pesachim is on Daf 96, on page 96, when Rabbi Zera asks, wait. We just learned all this stuff about sacrifices and the altar. But when they were doing their Passover in Egypt, what altars did they have? We know that you're supposed to sprinkle the blood on the altar, but what altars did they have? And what's Abaye's answer? What do you mean? Everybody had an altar. The altar was their house. Yeah, the corners of the altar were their doorposts and the lintel. No problem. That's the altar. And so my blessing for us, and also, something I'm really taking from Tractate Pesachim is, how do we get our hands dirty, first of all, with Judaism, with mitzvot, with commandments, with all of the aspects of living a Jewish life? And then second of all, how do we make sure that happens not only all of the actions that we do to be Jewish, not only at the synagogue, which we've now seen that we've tried to manage it in many different ways, but also in our homes, also in the most intimate of spaces. And when we are getting on our hands and knees later tonight, looking for the chametz, remember that every corner of the house is like a corner of the altar. It's really, really exciting stuff. And looking forward to getting our hands dirty in the next tractate as well.
Thank you, Rabbanit Fruchter. Yes, and I did feel like my hands were a little dirty reading some of these things for sure, but looking forward to getting physically dirty. I'm back with a few more of your answers to how reading this tractate is evolving what maybe you are doing at home. So one person wrote that I like the learning leading up to Chag, that the 4 questions could maybe be unnecessary if the kids spontaneously ask questions about the story. Another person writes, because of COVID and vaccine timing, we can't have our Seder on Saturday night, but I learned about the possibility of a Pesach Sheni in Pesachim and interpreted that since my family cannot come now, we will make our Seder a month later. Another of you writes, my study of Pesachim has led me to see what was important among all the details of the Seder as we know it today. Hallel has always been essential, even in the days of the temple. That's absolutely true. I don't think we do a full Hallel, but we will definitely do a lot more of it this year. And another of you wrote that you learned from the idea that, right, if a person doesn't have children to ask the questions, then they have their spouse ask the questions, or a colleague, or even if they do a Seder alone, they ask themselves the questions. Remember this teaching, that the idea that it is okay to make a Passover Seder alone, that the rabbis had a vision for that as a real possibility as well. Okay, normally at this point, I would take more questions to our experts, but I actually am going to jump in and say a few more things myself. Some of you know that I have a PhD in rabbinic literature. I am not a rabbi, but I do have a PhD in rabbinic literature, and I happen to write a dissertation on the early rabbinic perspective on Passover, so I have a little more to say on this tractate than maybe on some of the others. And a number of you wrote ahead of time with questions about the Greek influence on the rabbis here. And so I thought I would just address that quickly, because in my sort of historian hat, that's a more appropriate question, I thought, maybe for me to, though certainly, all of our rabbis are very learned. I don't want to say they're not. So the question is, and let me scroll to my notes. Sorry, I do better with notes. Okay, so the question is, the Passover, there is this idea that's in the popular culture, and it is true that the Passover meal is based on the Greco-Roman symposium. Can I just see a show of hands? Do people know this word, symposium? Oh, see, now it's hard to scan the views. This is very hard to pay attention to all these screens. Okay, so a symposium is a fancy Greco-Roman banquet. You can imagine in antiquity, when we didn't have things like Netflix, that if you wanted to get together, if you wanted leisure time, one of the ways they did this was banqueting, and they were really good banqueters. And so there's this idea that I thought I'd address, that the Seder is imported from the idea of the Greco-Roman symposium. And it's hotly debated in the literature. You have this idea that basically the rabbis just took the Greco-Roman symposium and threw a few Jewish symbols on top and stole it. That's one idea. There's also an idea that the rabbis actually made the Seder an anti-symposium, that they made it to feel like it's exactly the opposite of the Greco-Roman symposium. So lucky you guys, you're going to get my perspective on this that I wrote on. My sense of this is somewhere in the middle, and I'm going to give it to you by taking us to another rabbinic text. So I'm going to take us now out of the Talmud to the Tosefta. The Tosefta is a collection of early rabbinic teachings that is parallel to the Mishnah. And I'm going to also take us to a different tractate. I'm going to take us to Tractate Brachot. So we are no longer in the tractate talking about Pesachim. We are in the tractate talking about blessings. And so here is Tosefta Brachot 4a. Remember, they are talking about blessings. And here's what they say. What is the order of the meal? 1, guests enter and they sit on benches and on chairs until all of the guests have come in. 2, after everyone has come in, the servants give each one water to wash their hands. Then 3, the servants mix the cup, and that means wine, and each person individually blesses his own wine. Remember, they're thinking very hard about blessings right now. Next, they then move into the banquet hall and they recline. And then the servants give them water and they wash their hands again. Even though everyone has already washed their hands, now they wash again. Now the servants mix the cup, and even though he blessed the first cup, now he also blesses the second cup. Next, the servants place the parparot. This word was difficult in our Gemara this year. This tractate, it probably here means something like appetizers before them. And even though each one said a blessing over the first parparot, he then says it over the second parparot, or one blesses on behalf of all of them. A person who arrives at the banquet after the third course of parparot, of appetizers or little dishes, is not allowed to enter. Rabban Gamliel says that this was an important custom in Jerusalem. They would hang a napkin over their entryway, and while the napkin was hung up, guests were permitted to enter. And after the napkin was removed, guests were no longer permitted to enter. This is like the ancient version of the sock on the doorknob. That's the end of that Tosefta. Later in the tractate, the rabbis continue to discuss what goes on after the main course of the meal, the blessing that you say after you eat the meal, and also what blessings are said when the final wine and perfumed oils, some sort of after meal scent, is brought. And if this is sort of ringing your bells about the Passover meal, that's what I want it to do. You can see so many parallels. They're not describing a Passover meal here. They're simply describing a meal. And in fact, this kind of meal is actually found all over rabbinic literature. We see the rabbis dining like this in various cities. We see them do it in Tiberias and in Akko and in Lydda. We see them doing it on Erev Shabbat, and we see them doing it on Shabbat. We see them doing it on holidays. We see them doing it as part of a wedding banquet. We also see that they do it in mixed groups. You have just scholars, or you have scholars and students. We see women in the room. We see servants in the room. We see day laborers reclining and dining. We see priests and slaves alike taking part in this meal. And so what I would like to suggest is, yes, the Passover Seder is definitely borrowing on the Greco-Roman Symposium, but the Greco-Roman Symposium might not be exactly what you think it is. It is actually just banqueting practices that were absolutely ubiquitous in antiquity. This is kind of like the equivalent of saying they put their fork on their napkin when they eat, right? This is just something that people did across the board. And the rabbis import that not in a really conscious way of, well, we want to make a symposium or an anti-symposium. This was just a natural way of eating a meal, and the idea eating a meal with company, really. You could scarf a sandwich by yourself after a day's work. But if you're going to have a meal with company, so many of these elements are just natural parts of having a fancy meal in antiquity. And the real only difference is that they imported the biblical commandments about Passover. So they imported eating the Paschal lamb, eating the maror, eating the matzah, of course, saying Hallel. Actually, Hallel is not in the Bible, but they're sort of kind of really convinced that it is. And so it turns out that this Jewish ritual about Jewish redemption and Jewish individuality is actually one of the best preservations in the modern day we have of a very ancient non-Jewish practice, which is just goes to show how funny history can be. Okay, so that's my little spiel. Let me now return the floor to you guys. We collected a bunch of questions from all of you. And so now I'm going to pose some of those questions to our speakers. And you can feel free to let the questions keep rolling in. We will get to as many as we are able. So excuse me, I'm scrolling back through my notes to get to what we're supposed to do now. Okay, so Rabbi Fruchter, I'm gonna toss to you this time, because there are a lot of people who are asking questions about current customs versus rabbinic customs in the time of the Talmud versus temple customs, which are a couple hundred years before the rabbi. And so one of the questions people ask is, besides knowing that we don't sacrifice anymore because we don't have a temple, I'm not sure if it's okay to incorporate some of the customs I learned in Pesachim into my current practice. And paired with that, another person asks, why do they focus so much on the sacrifice if the temple has been destroyed? And how can I make amends if I don't have the means of bringing the sacrifice in the temple?
Wow,
what a couple things at you. Would you like to hear them again, or did you get them?
No, yeah, the wonderful questions. And actually, what we find in the halachic discourse, the legal discourse over the generations, is that there is a little bit of a discomfort with trying to replicate the practices at our tables, because it might look like we're sacrificing meat and eating it outside of the temple. And there's a little bit of this tension between people who want to keep doing the Korban Pesach, as we saw with Rabban Gamliel earlier in the Tractate, and people who are like, no, we have to do something completely different, right? So when we lose one of our structures, we keep the holdovers and adapt, or do we actually create something totally new? So I think it's a little bit of both. It ends up being a little bit of both, that we retain some of the ideas, but we try not to make it look exactly like what we were doing in the temple. As relating to the question of making amends when we don't have sacrifices, one lesson I'm thinking a lot about right now is the specificity under which you atone for your sins in the temple. Right? And that's a great lesson for today. Like how we look at every single dimension of being accountable, and we do it, right? It's not just about saying I'm sorry, but it's about understanding what level, what thing, what are my stakes in it. So I think that's really helpful also to think about. I think also Rabbi Straussberg had some stuff to say about the Korban Pesach throughout the generations. But
Rabbi Straussberg, have some stuff to say?
I'm sure there's always some stuff to say. Thank you, Rabbi Tasi. I just wanted to say there was a question that was about why are the sages so focused on the sacrifice when, I mean, all of this, so much of this tractate is we're so focused on the sacrifice, and there's no temple, there's no sacrifice that we're doing, but there's such a preoccupation with temple ritual and the sacrifice. Why not just move on? And I think what I'm thinking about there is, I think that there is a nostalgia, a longing for a time when there was something tangible and physical that we could do, both to, as Rabbi Dasi was saying, something tangible we could do to, we did something wrong, I do this physical, tangible action, and I know I've atoned for it. But also, you know, at the end of the day, we are very material people, and we relate with objects in our hands and touching things. You know, as Rabbi Tasi was saying, the work of, we might simultaneously be repelled by the blood and getting our hands dirty, but we also know what it means to work with our hands and get our hands dirty. And so I think there's a longing and nostalgia for, what if we lived in a time where we could actually go to a physical place and do a physical act, and either have that really bring us closeness with God, or atone for our actions, to have something tangible, make a real change in our world and our reality. So I think that there's a longing for that.
Thank you. I'm gonna jump in and say my perspective again, being a little more historical, that I have spent a lot of time thinking about this question too. And my sense is that the rabbis in this period had not yet lost hope that the temple would be rebuilt, right? We have not lost hope either, but it's looking a little more distant for us than it did for them. And the other thing I wanted to just add to the discussion is I actually had the privilege in 2012 of going to see the Samaritans make the Paschal offering. So the Samaritans are a group that broke off from the Jews about 500 years before the Common Era. By the rabbinic period, the Samaritans and the Jews, not such good friends. They have two separate temples, the Jews in Jerusalem and the Samaritans on Har Gerizim. And they have different calendars because the Samaritans aren't, doesn't matter. They have slightly different calendars. So I could go to the Samaritans on Pesach, and it wasn't my Pesach day, right? So I went to go, it was a regular weekday for me. And I went and I got to watch this ritual of slaughtering the lamb. And the biggest takeaway for me is how unbelievably emotional that experience is. Like being in the presence of these animals, watching them lose their lives. I happen to also be a vegetarian. So, but I think for anybody, and it is a kind of involuntary emotional experience. You don't get a choice. You are sucked in, right? It wasn't my Pesach. It wasn't my ritual. And yet I was completely sucked in emotionally and feeling all of the dread and anxiety and then relief when it's over. And it was just, I just went home and was kind of a puddle when it was all over. So those are two things that I think about when I read these texts as well, and when the rabbis are talking about the temple. Okay, I'm gonna now turn us over to Rabbi Lopatin with this question, which came in also from a viewer. Even now, I'm going to be doing, so even now, I think, meaning as we are doing this Siyyum, somebody here is multitasking and doing secular morning work. Good for you. The question is, how do you keep Jewish law in a secular world?
Well, thanks so much. And Dr. Rachel, after all that talk about food, I'm very hungry. But so I'm really, even though I'm the youngest in the family, I'm feeling this fast a little bit, which is good, which is healthy. And, you know, I want to try to maybe integrate the answer to that question that you asked with the idea of also the sacrifices in the temple. And I would just want to say that I am more hopeful. I think Mashiach is around the corner, the Messianic era. But I agree with you, Dr. Rachel, that it might be a very different kind of experience. I hope it has the passion when we rebuild the temple, but I hope it doesn't have all the sacrifice and all that kind of stuff. So, and I think that's sort of my answer to the questioner about how to integrate the secular world into the holy. One way was sort of as I discussed, pares mapal meva'u mekadesh, that you really separate the two, that you have your Shabbat that's very separate from the rest of the week, that you have your prayer times, even though I can daven a quick mincha, takes me 2 minutes to say the afternoon prayer, but it's still separating time. But the other idea, and that's in this tractate also, Masechet Pesachim, and has been beautifully discussed by Rabbi Dasi and Rabbi Avi, that to integrate the two. I think the challenge is for us to integrate the two. And I even think the idea of sacrifices, our rabbis sort of try to say that we will use our lips to give sacrifices. And on Shabbat or on the holidays, when traditionally we say there's an added prayer that commemorates the sacrifice, the Musaf, we always say be'ahava. It's going to be given with love. I always love to point this out. If these kind of things don't mean much to us, sacrifices, or, you know, Rachel, as you mentioned, it is very powerful when you see it, but I'm not looking forward to that. So we have to find a way of taking this, making sure the secular world is meaningful, and making sure that the two of them influence each other, that the world around us influences how we understand Judaism. If we're more vegetarian these days, or more understanding of animal suffering, that has got to enter our Judaism. And likewise, our Jewish values, like the beginning of Arvei Pesachim, that even the poor person, Hani, has to be given that kind of dignity that every human being deserves. Or as we've seen in the chat, there's a lot of talk about slaves and Jewish slaves, and in Thailand, servants, and that kind of stuff maybe that we get from the secular world has to influence our Judaism. And together, they have to work together. So there are times when we separate the two, and that's very healthy and important. We have to say stop to our secular world, and we have to also live in the secular world. And then there are times, I think mostly, we really have to try to integrate the two and have one learn from the other.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to take a minute and read a few more of your reflections now on how learning this tractate is changing your perspective on Passover this year. So one person writes, I particularly enjoyed learning recently that by smearing the blood on their doorpost, the Israelites actually actively participated in their own redemption, which was instrumental in their deliverance from slavery. From this, I appreciate more that everything we do to celebrate Passover ties us closer to the meaning of redemption and freedom. And another person writes, from this tractate, I learned the importance of asking questions, seeing the world with respect to who we are and how others live, commitment to continuing to learn and grow, the emotional complexity of being liberated from Egypt. They cite page 95 for that one, and also linking the Afikomen to Tikkun Olam. That's linked to page Pesachim 119. Okay, so I'm going to bring this over now to a topic that generated lots of interest, which was the demons. So Rabbi Straussberg, would you please take this one? A reader asks, I haven't bumped into demons before in Judaism until now. How should they be incorporated into my understanding of Judaism?
Yeah, that's a good one. Surprise, we love demons in Judaism. I would say that's a big takeaway of this tractate. There's a lot of demons, and that's, you haven't bumped into them yet. You're going to keep bumping into them in other tractates. I would say I am sort of in parts the sections in the Gemara that talk about demons. I am simultaneously amused by, they're bizarre, I dismiss them, and I'm fascinated and compelled by it. I feel like I have a range of reactions. I think it's easy for me to dismiss some of the conversations around demons as what is wrong with those rabbis? What are they doing? What world are they living in? And to hold the sages and those stories really at an arm's length distance of like, wow, that was just a really different world, and what craziness. I can't relate to any of that at all. Sometimes that's my first impulse on a superficial reading, especially when I'm doing it in the course of learning Daf Yomi. But I'm compelled to go a little bit deeper. I think what's going on with all the conversations about demons, besides that they really believe in them, is that it's revealing all of the deep-seated uncertainty that they're sitting within their world, all of the questions about why do things happen, why do bad things happen, things that they can't explain. And I really relate to uncertainty. In general, I really relate to uncertainty, and I would say that this has been a year of wrestling and sitting with immense uncertainty, all the questions that we haven't had answers to, of how this pandemic works, how long we're going to be in it, what our life is going to look like, when we'll return. And I think that the demons are one answer to the rabbis having questions for which they don't have answers. And I think the other thing that we see in the demons that I really want to push myself and push us to lead into is it's also a window into the rabbis' fear and anxieties. What are they afraid about? What are they concerned about? And them looking to demons to provide answers to why certain things are scary, or why we need to avoid things, or how we can stay safe. I think it's really just, on one hand, I think that there can be something distancing about it for those of us that don't think about demons in our everyday life. But for me, I feel like it's just seeing a manifestation of my own uncertainties and fears and anxiety playing out in a different world, and a world in which we sort of believe in and concretize those fears and uncertainty in the form of these demons that move at night or move in the darkness in ways that we don't understand.
Thank you so much. We are running up on the hour, so we are going to move to close now. Thank you so much to all of our experts for helping us to learn even more from this tractate, and to all of you for your contributions and telling us what you learned and what you are bringing to your Seders this year. I'm going to hand the mic right back to Rabbi Straussberg to teach us the last 2 lines in this tractate, and then the closing blessings, the Hadran and the Kaddish. I'm going to hand that over to Rabbanit Fruchter and Rabbi Lopatin in just a minute after you do that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I'm putting a link to the chat. We're going to be just finishing up the very last lines of the Gemara of the Tractate together, of Pesachim. You can grab that from Safaria in the chat if you want to read along with me. So we have a little bit of a story about Rabbi Simlai. Rabbi Simlai, Ikla le Pidyon Haben. So Rabbi Simlai, he happens upon a Pidyon Haben. So what's Pidyon Haben? Just as a reminder, this is the ceremony of the redemption of the firstborn. Why do we have to redeem the firstborn? Very much connected to Pesach. You might have thought on first view, as I did when I read the story, what does the story have to do with, why is this closing Pesachim? And we'll come back to this. It's actually a very related story, is that, of course, in the story of Exodus, of leaving Exodus, God killed all the firstborns. And we were spared. Our firstborns, thank God, weren't killed. And so we, in exchange for God having spared our firstborns and allowing our children to live, we offer our children to God, the firstborn, in service. But then we have to do this funny ritual where we buy our children back from the Kohen. We give the Kohen 5 shkalim in order to get the kids back. So that's the redemption. And it's very much tied to the Pesach story that God smote the firstborns of the Egyptians, but not ours. So Rabbi Simlai, he goes to this Pidyon Haben, this redemption of the firstborn ceremony, Ba'umine, and they ask him a question. So amazing that this rabbi goes to this Pidyon Haben, and they have a question for him, the celebrants of the ceremony. Pshita al Pidyon Haben, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al Pidyon Haben. It's obvious, it's clear that at the redemption of the firstborn, the blessing that is said, we're going to talk about 2 different blessings. And the question is, who says these blessings? The father, who has the obligation to redeem the firstborn son, or the Kohen, from whom the son is being redeemed? So it's obvious that for the blessing that is commanded us in the commandments on the ritual of redeeming of the firstborn, who says that language of Asher Kichanu B'Mitzvotav Avi Haben Mevarech, the father of the son who is doing the redeeming, that he says the blessing, because the obligation is on him. The question is, Baruch Shehechiyanu V'Kiyamanu Higiyanu Lazman Hazeh, the blessing of Shehechiyanu that we say on all sacred occasions, new articles of clothing that we're about to say on Pesach, but specifically it's also said at rituals like the redemption of the firstborn. Who says that blessing? Who says Shehechiyanu? Is that the Kohen Mevarech or Avi Haben Mevarech? Does the Kohen, who is getting the shkalim and the son is being redeemed from him, does he say the blessing? Or does the father of the son who is doing the mitzvah, does he say the Shehechiyanu? Here's one answer. Kohen Mevarech de kamate hana'al yadeh. It could be that the Kohen, he says the blessing of Shehechiyanu for bringing us to this moment, for sustaining us and enabling us to survive, for bringing us to this moment, because he's deriving benefit from it, because the money, the shkalim, are coming into his hands, right? He's getting benefit. Or Avi Haben Mevarech deka Avi Mitzvah. Or perhaps it's actually the father of the son who says the blessing of Shehechiyanu, of sustaining us, because he's performing the mitzvah. Lo havi biyadeh. He didn't have the answer. Amazing. I love this in the Gemara where the rabbis simply admit, I don't know the answer. So what does he do? He goes looking for the answer. He asks other people. It's okay to admit you don't know. Ate sha'il be midrash. He goes to the Beit Midrash, the study hall, to ask, who says the blessing? Amrule Avi Haben Mevarech Shtaim V'chichota Avi Haben Mevarech Shtaim. They say to him, the father of the son says both blessings, and this is the halacha, this is the law, that the father of the son says both blessings. I think the question being debated here is, who says Shehechiyanu, the blessing of sustaining, enabling to this moment? For whom is this a more significant occasion? Is it a more significant occasion for the Kohen that's getting money because the son is being redeemed from him, who's deriving benefit from the money? Or is it the father who's doing the mitzvah? And beautifully, the text says it's not about the money. The money is not the thing that makes it a significant moment. It's actually more significant for the parent who is performing this ritual of redeeming their son. That's the significance. I want to go just a little bit deeper and remind us, what is this moment? Why are we saying Shechechianu in this moment of redeeming the son? What is that blessing really about? And I want to connect it to Pesach today, reminding us that I think this is a twofold blessing on life. Literally, Shechechianu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu, that has enabled us, that has sustained us, that has given us life. This is a blessing on life in two ways. One, that our firstborns were spared, that our firstborns were alive, unlike the Egyptians. This is a blessing in which we're acknowledging loss and death, and it didn't have to be this way. It could have been that we could have lost our children, and thank God in this moment we're saying the blessing, thank God our kids are alive. And the second fold blessing on it, when do we do Pidyon Ben? When a child is 30 days. Why do we wait 30 days? Because we don't know that the baby's gonna make it. We wait 30 days to make sure that that baby is going to make it to 30 days. And so there's it's not only that our kid was spared in Egypt, but actually really it's a blessing on life that I'm able to do the redemption of my firstborn, because thank God my baby made it through the pregnancy and made it through the 30 days. So Shechechianu here in this moment is this double fold blessing on life. And we see that in the language itself. And I just want to connect this to, we're about to, for Pesach, we will say the Shechechianu ourselves, as we say on all these sacred occasions, to say, to God, thank you for enabling us, sustaining us, for bringing us to this moment. And I want to encourage us to lean into that and to know that this was a moment of tremendous loss. And there's a lot of people that didn't make it, that are not going to make it to this Pesach. And that in the moment when we're saying that blessing, both to acknowledge the deep losses of this year and the people that are not going to get to be with us for Pesach, that didn't get to say the blessing this year, and also to have the gratitude that we made it to this Pesach, as difficult as this Pesach still might be, that we really, a blessing on life for enabling us, sustaining us, and allowing us to make it to this Pesach and to have that together.
Thank you, Rabbi Straussberg. I am going to pass it to now Rabbi Lopat and Rabbi Fruchter for a blessing for all of us.
So we continue with the Hadran, we conclude Masachet Pesachim, but really we're saying we'll be back. We'll be back when we get here for the cycle next time or sooner. Hadran alach Masachet Pesachim v'hadrach alan. Datan alach Masachet Pesachim v'datach alan. Lo nitnashei minach Masachet Pesachim v'lo titnashei minan. Lo ba'alma hadain v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Yehi ratzon milfanecha, Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu. May it be your will, Hashem our God. Shetehei toratcha umanotenu ba'olam hazeh, utehei imanu la'olam haba. That our Torah be with us here in this world and the next. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achi bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rafram bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Sorchav bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha befinu. Sweeten the words of Torah in our mouths. Ubefifio samcha beit Yisrael, and in the mouths of all of the children of Israel. B'niyeh anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha beit Yisrael. Kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. May oivai techakmeni mitzvotecha ki li'olam hili. Yehi libi tamim b'chukecha. May my heart be perfect and upright in your laws. Lama'an lo evosh. Li'olam lo eshkach pikudecha ki vam chiyitani. Baruch atah Adonai lamdeni chukecha. Amen, amen, amen. Selah va'ed.
Amen, amen. Modim anachnu lach. We are so grateful, Hashem. Lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'lehavotenu. Why shesamta chalkeinu miyoshvei beit midrash v'lo samta chalkeinu miyoshvei kernot? You allowed us to come into the beit midrash to learn this Torah, and you didn't place us with the folks that hang out in the bars. I hope after COVID we get to go to the bars again, please God. But our focus should be on the beit midrash. She'anu mashkimim v'hei mashkimim. Everyone in this world wakes up and runs around. Anu mashkimim v'hei Torah. But we have to figure out how we can head towards Torah. V'hei mashkimim lidvarim b'teilim. And all around us are people running around, unfortunately, for things that they might think are valuable, but don't go anywhere. We have to set the direction. Anu amelim v'hem amelim. Everyone is working hard. Anu amelim v'kavim schar. But we work, and God willing, have a positive impact on our world and the world to come. V'hem amelim. It's a way of working. Sometimes you don't have the impact. Let's think about that. We got to run. We got to go. But we hope that our running is to the world to come, is to make this a better world. But we trust in Hashem. Hashem will allow us to run in the right direction. Please, everyone can join in and say this. May it be God's will, Kashem Shazartani, just as you have helped me l'sayim Masechet Pesachim, you allow me to finish Masechet Pesachim, all of us. Allow us not only to learn, but to teach and to keep. Let's do all this with love. And may the merit of all the people that have learned Torah before and everyone here should stand for us. And may it come to pass for all of us and those around us. Long days in the right hand, bismola, and the left side, osher v'chavod, honor and wealth and good wealth, meaningful wealth. Adonai ozamo yitain, Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom. Since we are gathered together, there are many things you can say. A Kaddish, and this is such a unique Kaddish. It's only said at a Siyyum. It's only said when finishing up a Tractate. And it's also said when we think of the world to come at a funeral. So it has all this middle part of rebuilding Jerusalem. And as we talked about, sacrifice. Let's make sure that, God willing, we're part of the process of rebuilding Jerusalem in a beautiful way, filled with peace and love. Yitkadel v'kadesh shemei rabbah. And feel free to unmute, if I don't know if you can actually, but feel free to respond. Yitkadel v'kadesh shemei rabbah. Ve'omadu atid litcharata u'lachaya meitaya u'laskein l'chaya alma u'levini karti Yerushalayim u'shalel chechalei begavei u'me'aker puchan u'nuchra me'ara u'atzava puchan u'shmaila atre v'yamlich kutchabrichu b'malchutei v'karei v'chaychon v'yamechon v'chayi d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala u'vizman kari v'imru amen. Hey shmei rabam v'rachulam v'amaya Yiparach v'ishtabach v'par v'tramam v'nasei v'hadar v'dalev v'dalau shmei d'kudisham brichu le'elam v'kovachata v'shurata v'shurata v'nechamata damiram be'alma v'imru amen. And now a blessing for everyone learning Torah. Al Yisrael v'Rabbanan v'al Tamidei Hon v'al Kol Tamidei Hon v'al Kol Man Daskim B'Oraita Dibatra Hadem Dibachol Atar v'Atar Yehi Lahon Ulachon Shlama Ramachina v'Chisa Rachamei v'Chayei Arichei Mezonei Revichei for Kanam Karama v'Hondi v'Shmaya v'Ara v'Imru Amen Yehi Shlama Rabba Mishmaya v'Chaim Aleinu v'al Kol Yisrael v'Imru Amen Oseh Shalom b'Ramav Hu Yaseh B'Rachamav Shalom Aleinu Thou call Yisrael v'imru amen. May God make peace on our earth, just as God make peace on heaven, in the merit of the Torah learning we've all done. Chag Sameach, Azis Pesach.
Thank you. Thank you again to our amazing contributors, Rabbi Lopatin, Rabbi Straussberg, Rabbi Fruchter. Thank you to all of you learning with us, and to all of you who are watching either on Zoom or on YouTube. If you have friends on the West Coast who did not get up early enough for this Siyyum, or who like to sleep late, or who knows, just want to see the Siyyum, please know we are going to post a recording to YouTube presently. And to everyone, a Chag Kasher v'Sameach and a happy Pesach. Bye, everybody.
Hey, Chag Kasher v'Sameach.